This is the Mod Pod, brought to you by Modality, helping businesses optimize their Microsoft technologies everywhere.
Hello and welcome to the Mod Pod, episode 26. As you can probably guess, Pete isn't at the table this week. He's away doing, well, I don't know what he's doing. He does manager stuff at points. Today, we've got myself, Chris Burns. We are joined at the table by Michael DeDominick, our ACM specialist, consultant, head of ACM.
There you go. Yeah, all of the above.
One of them. We also have joining us as a newbie this time. So we have Jenny Little, who, Jenny,
Hi.
your title is project manager?
Project manager, yes.
Project manager. We have two subjects for you today. First one being FinOps. What is it and why does it matter? And the second subject we're going to talk about today is SharePoint and the move to SharePoint, and do folders matter? So let's start with subject one. Okay, subject one, FinOps. I read an article about FinOps on ZDNet the other day, and it's this idea that you can save money on your Azure platform. I find this very, very strange to have a name called FinOps, because I would have just thought it would have been cost management. But yeah, I'm curious to put to the table is, does FinOps, is it a thing? Is it something that businesses should be doing? Should it be named, or is this something that should businesses be doing it anyway as part of moving to the cloud?
Well, I mean, right off the bat, it's obviously a big enough different thing that we're starting to make it a thing, right? So right away, it's like, oh gosh, I mean, there's some traction behind this thing. And even in my little ACM bubble, it's kind of like, if it's enough to give it a name and to make it a separate thing other than, you know, training and communication planning and that sort of stuff, then it's like, oh, okay, this needs some emphasis. And so that's what I get from it being its own name. Like, okay, there's enough people that are overspending or not necessarily managing it the same way that they maybe should be, that have kind of made the transition to the cloud in a way that they could be more efficient, and there's enough money to be saved that now it's a thing.
I wonder if the name FinOps has become a thing because of the sheer amount of money. So from the article, I'm just quickly reading here, that they estimated, so this is for global organizations, and that cloud usage is higher than initially planned this year. They estimated that their organizations waste 32% of cloud spend, and that's up from 30% in last year's survey. I mean, let's make it a number, right? It's a third. So we're saying that organizations that move into the cloud think they're wasting a third of their bill on stuff they don't need, right? Again, is it FinOps because it's a sheer amount of money? I mean, I haven't got any figures in front of me, but something like, well, here we go, 12 million or more annually on selected public cloud services. And I don't know whether that's, either way, it's that's small to medium businesses, sorry. So it's a chunk of cash. I mean, my question probably is, and especially Jenny, if I could put it to somebody that works with organizations to move people to the cloud, do they go to the cloud almost closed mind? I know, Michael, you said this in the pre-meeting, but do they go with this view of, we just want like for like, or do organizations say, we're moving to the cloud and we're going to have a new way of thinking? My fear is it's probably the primary rather than the latter. They're moving to the cloud because COVID's pushed them to that point, or their impetus has moved them to that point. Ideally, they would probably want to say, we're doing this in a controlled way. But based on this article, the evidence is saying, actually, no, they're probably just doing like for like.
I think there's two elements to this. I think there's company. I think they should be analysing their spend and what their savings are going to be before they move to the cloud, and to give them a good a good reason for them to move to the cloud. But I think there are a lot of businesses out there that see the new technology and they just want like for like. We're going, right, I want some of that. But yeah.
So I think businesses, they, as you say, it's the buzzword is to move to the cloud. I know certainly in the beginning of my career, when I started moving to the cloud, it was probably a lack of understanding of what features were available, and that the like for like was, right, we're going to spin up 6 servers up in Azure, of which one of them might have been a database server, another one might have been a web server, and they span it up because that's what they knew. Do we think that today people still do that? So if we talk about Azure, for example, there's Azure SQL, which can be as cheap as £20 a month here in the UK, or a virtual machine for this similar amount of grunt is going to cost them big bucks. We know, we've seen this problem. I probably naively thought that people who had started to realize what functionality was available, but maybe not. And again, if we take it back to the title, FinOps, from that article, it's suggesting that it's not the text that's driving this new name. This is the finance people saying, right, we're spending 33% more, 32% more than we should. What are we spending it on, and how can we save it? And does that drive now a new conversation with the finance teams towards the IT teams of saying, use Azure or AWS more efficiently?
Yeah, like the promise of the cloud essentially has not been fully realized, right? So what's how it's been positioned, how it's been sold, multiple locations with backups, etc. Lots of that still beneficial, still something you didn't have before, disaster recovery, blah blah blah. People are people, psychology is psychology. I deal with this in a space of even like, guys, we can go down to telephony workflows, and we still, in our heart of hearts, want one for one the functionality that we've been leveraging for 10, 15, 20 years to be exactly how we're doing it now. And getting used to a new tool takes way more work and way more discovery. A, to your point, Chris, understanding what that tool is capable of, and B, understanding how we get from that A to B. And as you guys are both well aware, especially you, Jenny, just the transition to get everything functioning as it should in the cloud so that we're kind of safe and comfortable with it is enough work in and of itself in so many instances. Yeah. But then to take the time to think about how we're working, how we're changing how we work, it's like its own whole separate discovery and workshop type of process. And man, like that's a body of work in and of itself. That's what I'm thinking. Like it's extra work to think about how you work and not just migration, if that makes sense. What do you guys think?
It's hugely underestimated, I think, the amount of work that's involved. Definitely.
Let me ask you this, Jenny. When from a PM view, when organizations do these kind of migrations into the cloud, what tends to be their biggest constraint or biggest drivers? What I mean by that is I get the impression from the customers that I tend to work with is we need to get there by this date. It doesn't tend to be we need to get there. We can spend as long as we want, but this is what we want it to look like. And
yeah,
it might be a mixture of two, but
I think that's normally down to budgeting on their side. It's down to contracts ending, like maintenance contracts for their existing telephony systems. They're the biggest drivers, really, and that's why there are so many time constraints. That's why you don't have all the time in the world to ensure a good transition with the change and making sure that everyone's on board, know what they're doing. They're the biggest drivers that I've seen working.
Yeah. And I suppose then from an ACM, I'm just thinking of a recent customer that I've worked with. ACM is almost seen as the optional extra. But actually, when you're making this such a massive paradigm shift from on-premise to in the cloud and getting the best out of it, you can't really go into that without really knowing what you're going into. And this is where I think something like ACM and that kind of hand-holding of saying, yeah, we know you've got an internal intranet, for example. Have you thought about putting it onto an IIS server rather than creating another virtual server? And I think there's probably conflicts there. Am I right? I'm probably rambling a little bit here, but is there a conflict there of saying, we just need to get this up and over? SharePoint projects are a prime example of this, right? We need to move the SharePoint site. Yeah, we've got SharePoint on-prem. We saw it. We're using it with file shares. We're kind of not really getting the best out of it. We just need to move into online. And we know that there's certain functionality in SharePoint on-prem that isn't available online. But actually, the benefits of moving online, there is more tools in there. I don't get the impression from the customers that I work with that they say, do you know what? We want to find out how to do this better. We just need to get this done, and we need to get it done now. And I get the impression that probably 80-90% of the organizations that we engage are probably, we just need to get over as quickly as possible. Is that fair?
Yeah. So yeah. I'm really interested to hear Jenny's perspective on this too, because I swear we can have all our technical ducks in a row, and we can have comms all scoped out and ready to go, and like the any sort of training or documentation stuff we need for, hey, here's where your stuff's going to be, right? Here's how you're going to access it. Here's your portal. That can all be good to go. But kind of like what you're talking about earlier, what goes, what needs to get out, go, right? And who makes those decisions, and what is the process to walk through that piece? Like, what do we keep? What needs to get archived? What needs to be accessed? Like, do we need to change how we're labeling and storing things, right? Do we need to think about security labeling in a different way now? Like, that is harder work than a copy paste one for one every time. And that always seems to be kind of to your guys' point as well, like, hey, this takes longer to do this part of it. Like, we can do, build it out, make the structure, make the new thing, but figuring out what goes and where it goes and what gets kicked out, that's to me from our side of things, that's a thing. Jenny, what do you think?
Yeah, no, that's so true. No, I've come across that several times, and people struggle with it, But.
Yeah, I wonder if taking this 33%, I think you've just hit a point there that's just made the light bulb in my brain go, right? Is that 32% because we're just taking everything across? So SharePoint is a great example of that, right? You have 2 terabytes worth of data. 1.8 terabytes of that data have never been accessed for the last 15, 20 years. And I can bring this personally as well. I'm about to upgrade my PC, and I'm sat there and I'm actually worried about, I need to take the hard drive, I'll put a new hard drive in. What am I going to forget, right? I know that I save things in OneDrive, but actually I'm now thinking, do you know what? I'll just copy everything because I'm scared to lose it.
Yeah.
And I wonder if most of this expenses here is people say, well, we don't waste 32%. But actually, if they ask themselves a really hard question, say, you've moved SharePoint, you've moved your 1.5 terabytes or 2 terabytes of data. You've said, we don't know what's going to be accessed, so we're going to move everything up. Actually, the figure is 32% is still probably wasted because they've got to pay for storage for that.
Yeah.
Or an element of storage, all we've got to work with. But actually, if they were to really challenge themselves during that migration and say, actually, we don't need to move 2 terabytes, we only need to move 200 gig. And the rest, as you say, Michael, could be archived off and saved. And there's that 32% saving.
Well, think about this too, okay? How long have we had things like autosave and co-authoring, and how long have people, this is literally down to like user level stuff for my, ACM, whatever. How long have we had that, and how long have people been downloading or loading in their personal OneDrive a whole different version of a document, and now there's 16 versions of one PowerPoint that's massive, and it could all just be in one spot that everyone's accessing? Like, how much of that type of baggage even? So, I mean, part of what you're saying, Chris, is almost at like a business unit level, filtering through what do we need and where does it need to be. But then, oh my gosh, like you got me going on like a user level of this, right? So we could all literally 20 versions of a document or PowerPoint, whatever, pick something, and we only need one, and what are we even doing? And I don't even think the article's going that far with what they're thinking of, but that just kind of popped my brain a little bit.
And that's a good point. If you ask a user to say they're migrating from one machine to another, and you ask them to go through all of their files, making sure, right, okay, you only need one version of that document. How much time it takes that one user to do that job, and then you multiply that across a whole business.
Yeah, it'll never happen. Yeah,
exactly.
Of course it won't. Yeah, it'll never happen. Yeah. I think the challenge you've got there is saying to that user, and I bet, and I'm going to put my neck out on a line here, right? But I bet if we asked the majority of people who work in an office or Microsoft Office, are you aware what co-authoring is? Because that's a massive feature of SharePoint Online, right? And Teams. Are you aware what co-authoring is? Nah, I just save my files up there and send an email a copy of it. And I guess that is probably what's leading to where we are now. Is it's that inaction or that inability, or as you say, Jenny, lack of time to know how to do it the right way is offset. That's where costs come in. And I guess taking Microsoft's point of view, yes, they want to sell all the new fandangle stuff, but if people are going to take 15 years worth of archive data and prepared to pay us for it, are they really going to try and discourage it? Yeah, that's an interesting question.
Yeah, one of my favorite drums to beat over my entire tenure with anything related to ACM is send links, not files.
Yeah.
Send links, not files. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's a message just right there. If there was like one message to the world, it'd be that, and then @mention probably.
Yeah, @mention. I wouldn't know what to do without it. But I think that those functionalities of @mention, metadata, actually that takes us very comfortably into probably our next conversation, which is SharePoints and folders. So with that, why don't we start subject 2? So, second question I'd like to bring to the table is around and this is nicely tied into our last conversation, is around migration to SharePoint and old school ways of working and file shares. My question really is that, are we so attached to the old school way of working of file share? So we call it here at Modality, the S drive. It's been around for so long, whereas moving up to SharePoint and using things like metadata and the really not really well understood content types. And my question really is, even from the youngsters that are joining the organization now that are looking at folder structures and going, what? Because if you think that they're picking up an iPhone or an iPad, they're not searching in a folder structure in that. They're just typing, show me all the photos from Arizona. So where SharePoint really helps is around that tagging. So my question is, how well should we be using folders in SharePoint? Let's put it right down. Let me put it to the table. Do you guys, are you attached to your folder structure? Jenny, if you look at your laptop and you look at your My Documents, do you have a really well-defined folders, or is everything just dropped into your OneDrive?
I don't know whether I should be answering this, to be honest.
Do it.
I am one of those people that was very attached to my my folders drive. And it did take me a while personally to move to SharePoint. I'm on it now and I love OneDrive. I think it's fantastic, to be honest. I do think it takes users a lot that are used to using their shared folders to moving to SharePoint. It looks different, it feels different. When other people can update the same document, I think there's a bit of whether you don't know whether it's already been updated by somebody else. Has it saved your version? I do think there's a bit of confusion there. I think there's a bit of worry for a lot of users. But on the other hand, when you're talking about the younger generation and people that are technically capable, they have no concerns at all. But yeah, I am one of those people that was very reluctant to move across, but I love it now.
So Jenny, two things come to mind based on what you're sharing. The first is almost a carryover from our last conversation about the habits that we've built and the carryover for new tools, right? And it's version history. I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head. Is what bridges that gap. And just like people might not be used to co-authoring or even autosave for that matter, people are not used to version history. And that is a major benefit, that you can just click back, go back, see who edited things last. And it's huge. And it's I think there is some generational gap in understanding there potentially, but there might just be some gap in understanding across the board, honestly, on that one. And then the other thing I would say is I'm a major bucket, big bucket guy, and filter it and arrange by date. And that's my bread and butter. I generally don't go beyond documents, pictures, however the OS is organizing it. Like beyond that, I'm like, meh, whatever. Search, when was the most recent? Like, and I'm done. I'm done. So
I think it's a time thing now, isn't it? It's Jenny, I was probably like you, right? I'm going to give away my age. I'm 42, right? And I entered the workplace where folder structures and S drives were the way to do it. But I also remember from back then is if that organization was large enough, trying to find a file within an S drive became such an absolute pain in the ass. You would create a copy of it and you'd say, right, well, I think it might be over in that client. We can't find the template, so we'll create a new template. We'll save it in here. And you ended up with, what deduplication technologies came out to try and fix it. But I think that was trying to fix a problem that was inherently a file share problem, right? Why do you need to deduplicate stuff when you're backing up, when you've got the same file located everywhere? And that was because we didn't really have those tools. So I'm an absolute convert. I love the fact in Teams, for example, I guess you could see it's a pseudo file system, but you get so much, you get so much more. So we set up in our organization Teams for each individual customer, and then within there, but we don't necessarily create folder after folder after folder. We're almost using that metadata. So we would say, for example, and I'm probably speaking for the audience rather than for us, but we end up saving a file, and it might get tagged as in my department, it might be tagged as an LLD or a HLD. And the idea being is that, right, we can be able to say now, I want an LLD that is, as you said, Michael, it was created within the last 6 months, and I want it for all customers. Creating that kind of search in an old S drive would have been an absolute nightmare. It's great if you're searching for one file, but if you're saying I want a copy of all of these, I think that would be nigh on impossible. I'm saying that it wouldn't be impossible, but it's much more difficult with a traditional file system. So I'm with you, Jenny. I've moved over, and my OneDrive kind of has a folder structure. But I don't have that same care of attention of customers beginning with A to C, customers D, because quite frankly, it becomes more of a pain to keep it tidy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think one of the major shifts too is when you start talking about documents that are shared with you that are not like yours in your OneDrive, right? So that one gets a little trickier, right? Did I relabel that? Is that in my OneDrive now, or is it just one that's been shared with me? And I think that, if you're talking about something that's been like a link shared in a channel, that's pretty easy to track down. But sometimes, it gets tricky, and you have to pop out to the, the browser-based version of OneDrive to track down what's been shared with you. And just that is, I think, underrated as well. It's so nice to just be able to boom, 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 see that list of everything that's been shared with you. So again, kind of thinking about groups of files versus it's another type of group of file, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think, and I think some of those benefits that you mentioned earlier, things like retention and those kind of labels and encryption labels, right? What historically, if you were to say, right, these retention labels, we need to save this file for 7 years. historically you would put it into a, let's say in a file share, the S drive customer A to Z contracts.
Yep.
And you would apply the retention label to all documents within that folder. Whereas now with something like SharePoint, you set that up as a content type to say, this is a contract. And because that content type is set to that document, it could be just a Word document of a type of contract. That's in essence what a content type is, right? But the retention label carries across with that. So as soon as that is set to a contract, it doesn't matter if it's saved in the S drive customers contracts or it's been misdragged and being dropped into the pictures folder. Yeah, the actual
it'll still surface.
It's still, yeah. So I think ultimately the benefit of moving to a folderless SharePoint is it can be a positive, right? But it feels
the older,
yeah, exactly. That's the point I was going to make.
Yeah.
If you're used to using the old school way of working, it is a scary change because you go, oh my God, where is my document gone? Whereas the youngsters will come in and say, well, just I want the contract for AZ. Search,
well,
go get me
it's almost like now the name of the folder is like a tag now, right? Yeah. And that's how you're organizing, and that makes me think about just naming convention as well, right? So essentially, the things that we used to bake into naming convention and folder names can just be part of that metadata, right, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I think if you genuinely ask somebody from the older generation, they probably used file names as metadata, right?
Yeah.
Whereas,
because they were searchable, because that's what was searchable.
Yeah.
And that convention was a really big deal. Like, is it when are you putting the date in? Is the format of the date right? Like, is it at the beginning of the name or is it at the end of the name? Because that's going to change how it's going to appear alphabetically. Like, there's anyway, yeah.
And I think, and apologies, I'm probably talking over you a bit, Jenny, but what I do like about it is what you can do with that metadata within SharePoint. So if we take a blank contract, for example, you could set a file share up or a library is now, right? So in that library, it has preset metadata. So the Word document itself might have a template to say for customer, but it's just a blank. As soon as you save that in that library, it looks at the metadata for that library and automatically fills that information in, right? That kind of tech, that's been around since 2007 SharePoint, if not earlier. But that idea of being able to say, do you know what? I don't need to create a document from blank because I can use the folder structure now to actually build a big chunk of that. And I know we're moving on to the next part of it, which is Microsoft Loop, which is probably a whole different conversation again, because this the new people now, I swear to God, my son will come into the workplace and go, what's a Word file? I just can't imagine. We've created this concept of a file of an A4 piece of paper digitally because the older people who started this could only think paper. They can't think digital. And God forbid you show them dark mode and they go, oh, my word sheet is in dark. Is it going to print out with black and white?
Yeah. That's going to be so expensive.
Yeah.
But it's the same with using OneNote, isn't it? Like those people that have been used to writing with a pen and paper, and there's so many people that still do that and prefer that over OneNote. It's I think it's an educational thing, and having the confidence to use the technology.
Yeah, and being aware of the technology. To loop it back around to the beginning of the conversation, is being aware of what's available. And I think again that's the challenge. And I suppose ask anybody in the business world, have you got time to learn this? And I think almost everybody will say, I want to. I know it's there. I know there's better ways of working, but I just don't have time to change the way of working. And I suppose that we as an industry in IT, that's what we've got to make easier for Bob, who's in accounts, who is used to creating an Excel sheet that he has a copy on his S drive that he's had for the last 15 years that he keeps a copy of or a duplicate of. Yeah, so
well, it's realizing the benefits, right? And so until you're in that scenario, you don't get why like OneNote is better than saving a bunch of Word files in your customer file, and then you've got a Word document for each meeting notes that you're taking. Like, I'll fully admit that when I started at Modality, I was taking notes in Word and not in OneNote. And just now I literally couldn't imagine.
Yeah.
Could not imagine doing that.
We were
Because the
talking
structure is
about
built in, like you were saying with the templates. Like the structure is already built in, and you can leverage that now.
Yeah. I think people probably underestimate this idea of templates. Even my generation probably would say template. Oh, I don't know how to use those. A dot T or a doc T, I think is the at the end of it, isn't it? Or DOT. Oh no, I just create the document as I need it. Well, actually, if you open up this template, it's going to have all of the information that'll be dynamically built for you. And as you say, Jenny, there's almost an apprehension there of, oh, I don't know who's edited it. This the co-authoring part of using it. I don't know who's edited it. I'm scared if somebody else edits it without me knowing. So I think it ultimately boils down to an education. And unfortunately, to probably answer my question right at the beginning is, do I see SharePoint folders disappearing? Not until the old fogies start dropping off and retiring, I think is going to be the answer to that.
Oh, man. Chris, you just made me think, templates, right? Education. I think at least over here, for so many years, it's beaten into your brain that your work needs to be original, and it needs to be your words, and it needs to be, there's no copy pasting, there's no stealing what someone else did, and then you go to work, and everything now is a template. It's a boilerplate that you're tweaking. You're adjusting 30% of it, and that's what gets put across. And it's almost like in our brains, deeply ingrained, everything needs to be just all ours, all original every time. But that's not what business needs.
No,
that's not how that works. But I think in school it's beaten into us. Not literally, please, for the podcast. But it really is mentally a thing where templates, that's not okay. We can't just, someone else did that work, not me. I can't take that work. I don't know.
And I think it's moving on even still. We mentioned earlier about Microsoft Loop, and when we did the podcast on Loop, it was almost a question, what would it be used for? And I started thinking, taking away what I would see the benefit of that would be. And if we talk about things like an LLD, so we might do a call recording piece of software, and that LLD will have an introduction section about what our call recording software does, right? And we would normally copy and paste that from a Word document and then update it for that particular customer based on modules. Where I think we're going to is something like Microsoft Loop would be, our subject matter expert would update the component centrally. Let's say in a Teams site, he would update the Loop component, which would say, and because it changes so quickly, we're in a cloud-based world, right? We need that quick change to say, this is what it's going to be, this is what new features have come out, and he will set up a paragraph within Loop. All of our documents, Word documents, will have a Loop component where it goes for the call recording software, and it would link up to that Loop system. So you will always have the most up to date. Now, we know internally within consulting, Microsoft Teams has just updated 2 days ago, but we're telling customers, unless we know of that change, we're saying to customers, no, you can't do that. And actually, one of our managing consultants got caught this morning to say, I didn't realize we could do that now. Why? Because Microsoft literally just released it 5 days ago to say, actually, we can now make a change to it. So I don't think static documents, the old school way of S drive and saying last edited, it just doesn't work in today's environment. And even the tools that we use and sell today, not including things like Loop, still have a lot to go to make sure data is as up to date as possible. Because I think we just live in a world where as soon as you write something down, it's out of date.
To your point, I am constantly pointing people toward the what's new section in the help section of Teams, because I could give a training and 10 days later, all of a sudden you've got all these great options for breakout rooms, for example, in meetings, right? And you can split them up, and there's multiple people who can manage that. And that when we wrote that training, maybe that wasn't there yet,
Michael, I do not envy your role, honestly. somebody asking, saying, well, how do we do this? You can't do it. No, you can now. Especially if the customer knows it before you, because they've just read the Microsoft Docs yesterday.
Yeah, well, that's why, that's why tap is nice for sure.
Yeah.
But then you forget what's GA, so you can have the reverse problem. Like, ooh, I can't talk. I don't want to say anything. I don't know if that's under NDA. I better not say anything. Yeah. Ooh, I'm not going to say anything. I think that might be NDA.
Awesome.
Yep.
So,
good times.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that we've probably gotten pushed to our end of that time. So I think we'll probably try and wrap it up there. So my big thanks to you, Michael, and Jenny. Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
And
Thank you.
we will catch up next week.
See you guys.
Take care.
Thanks, Dan. Bye-bye.
Click.
Bye.
This is the Mod Pod, brought to you by Modality, helping businesses optimize their Microsoft technologies everywhere.